Rated #1 comic book villain of all time by IGN, Magneto is an anti-hero for the ages, with such a complex and almost understandable motivation, and just some of the simplest, coolest powers out of any super mutant. He's just one of my personal favorites. But today we're not talking about the Magneto we all know. We're talking about the alternate versions of Magneto when he appeared as a hero and had the readers or the viewers actually rooting for him. Number 10, we have Magneto from Earth 9997 or Earth X. In this arc, the governments of the world enlist sentinels to round up all the mutants they could find and put them into quarantine camps. This angers Magneto, who sees mutants as his brothers, and he knows he can't just fight against the sentinels there and then because they're immune to his powers. So instead, he tricks them into following him to the Savage Land, where he knows the air was thick with iron, meaning he could manipulate it to defeat the Sentinels. So with that plan in effect, Magneto uses this advantage to construct Sentinel City with the help of the robots and has his former lackey Toad endowed as an honored citizen, which is pretty nice of him as well, if I do say so. Down the line, when Absorbing Man tries to absorb the entire island of Manhattan, Magneto unleashes an all-out assault using his Sentinel army to defend New York. He fails, but at least he tried. So saving his entire race, trying to save New York, and being nice to Toad, I think it's fair to say that this version of Magneto acted heroically with some pretty dang good intentions. Number 9 on our list comes from the Secret Wars storyline, where the X-Men turn to Magneto as an ally to help defeat the Beyonder. In this reality, there is a common enemy for superheroes and Magneto to face together. This isn't done without some friction though, as the good guys still hold things against him. In fact, when they first considered joining up against the Beyonder in issue 1, everyone argues with Magneto, who won't stop pushing his problematic philosophies, but Professor X vouches for him, and in a later issue, after some more infighting, Magneto finally comes around. The tough part of this storyline is that Magneto really is a huge asset to the team in their efforts against the Beyonder, but his arrogance and insecurities just make it so hard to work with him. So yes, Magneto is a hero in this storyline, but he doesn't really have that wholesome energy that most superheroes flaunt with ease. At least he stands by what he believes. I'll give him that much. Alright, at number 8 we have the Magneto from Captain America 5. In this storyline, Magneto is once again finding his way into Captain America's business, but not to team up with the hero. Well, in a way I guess he sort of is. This version of Magneto isn't much different from the rest. He's still got the backstory of the Holocaust, and with that comes a lot of totally justifiable and understandable resentment, especially when it comes to facing off against Red Skull, a known Nazi character. In Captain America issue number 367, Magneto spends the whole time chasing down Red Skull, at one point facing off against at least 9 Red Skull decoys. It goes without saying that the reader is meant to be rooting for Magneto in this part of the story as he seeks out his just revenge against Red Skull. I mean, Red Skull even does a salute and everything. It's an old comic. Can we even show that? But what makes this version of Magneto really deserve a spot in this list is how he handles Red Skull once he gets the best of him. Instead of acting like a villain and doing what Red Skull would have done, killing him, Magneto just leaves him in a cold, dark cell. He rises above the evil deeds of Red Skull and leaves him to think about the horrors that he'd perpetrated. Bam! Take that, Red Skull. That was a satisfying and definitely heroic moment for Magneto. Alright, let's move on to number 7 with a newer X-Men storyline, Dawn of X. In this storyline, which only came out in February 2020, Magneto is once again coming to the aid of the mutants of Professor Xavier's school. This comic series tells the story of Professor X trying to build the first mutant civilization on an island called Krakoa, which is actually an effort that Magneto could get on board with, considering his strong convictions for equal rights for all mutants. Right off the bat in the first issue, we have Magneto showing tenderness towards Cyclops, a typical enemy of his, as they face off against apes with PhDs. Tragically, spoiler alert, Professor X is assassinated and Magneto is in a state of deep mourning for his old friend. And later we see Jean Grey trying to appeal to a depressed Magneto who seems to have forgotten his old grudges against the X-Men. They work together to try and resurrect Professor X, and I'm not going to tell you what happens because this is a new issue and you should read it. But once again, Magneto has found a common thread with the other mutants in this storyline, ending up fighting alongside them rather than against them. Alright, at number 6, it's the Magneto in original Uncanny X-Men, where the supervillain actually comes through a number of times. Firstly, in issue 150, we see him defusing a very serious situation where Russian nukes are headed towards him and others. Although this actually was an attack to prevent Magneto from doing his own evil deeds, he stops a nuclear attack nonetheless, which could arguably have been more detrimental than what he'd have planned. Further down the line in issue 200, there's a trial taking place where where Magneto is facing charges against him. But he redeems himself when he saves the courtroom and eventually Professor X again from attacks from the Von Strucker twins, Andrea and Andreas. He ends up protecting Professor X at first from certain death, but loses him at the end of the day, and Professor X's dying wish is for Magneto to take over his school and to guide the new mutants towards greatness, which Magneto agrees to do. We even see Magneto shed a tear when Jean Grey realizes that Professor X's energy is no longer detectable. And as the series goes on, Magneto does take over the school and acts in Professor X's place. I think there's a theme here. Magneto's good side only seems to come out when he's trying to protect or avenge his old friend Charles Xavier, and when he's fighting Nazis. Okay, at number 5, we have Pre-Radicalized Magneto from issue 161 of Uncanny X-Men. In a set of flashbacks, Professor X brings us back 20 years to when he was introduced to Magnus, aka Magneto. This version of Magneto appears to be caring and not yet troubled by his twisted philosophies that later dictate his questionable actions. In this flashback, which takes place near the end of World War II, we see Professor X and Magnus trying to rehabilitate a young woman who had once been a prisoner in Dachau, infiltrating her mind and trying to free her from a catatonic state. This effort seems to be one of good nature on the part of Magneto and shows an alternate version of him that is protective and concerned. He saves Charles and the young girl from a cave, collapsing it on Baron von Strucker and levitating them to safety. Of course, this is soon muddled up by a conversation that he had with Professor X regarding philosophies of mutants and where they inevitably disagree. They end up arguing and Magneto flies away with a bunch of gold they just found together. Well, you know, it was nice while it lasted, right? Okay, at number 4 we have Magneto from X-Men Legacy. We find ourselves in a world where mutant kind is at risk of extinction. An army of Sentinels have made it their duty to exterminate all mutants, another common enemy that Magneto and the X-Men decide to face together. In issue number 237, Magneto is depicted without his typical costume and super jacked, facing off against a convoy of Sentinels sent to finish off the last remaining mutants. He fends them off the best he can, protecting Cable and a young new mutant, Hope, classic, who is just that to the mutant cause, the only hope they had left. You see what they did there? Anyway, in this epic confrontation with the Sentinel horde, Magneto gets a one-up on them when he reveals that the asteroid they're fighting on had been built by himself, and it had been built out of, you guessed it, iron. So he pulls up some big nasty spikes from the ground and takes out a handful of them all at once. That's right, an absolutely jacked, zaddy Magneto holding the final frontier before the extinction of all of mutant kind, using his final shreds of energy left to do something so heroic, it arguably changed the outcome of this whole storyline, for the greater good. Alright, number 3, we've got the Magneto from Earth 2149. For those of you who don't know already, they did us the absolute service of creating a series where Marvel superheroes and villains alike face off against zombies. And not only that, but superpowered zombies. Yes, the infection only affected those with superpowers, who quickly overpowered the non-superpowered population, humans, but one of the biggest forces defending against the zombie horde is none other than Magneto, who takes his last stand cutting the zombies off from other dimensions. But when this Magneto really starts looking like a hero is when the battle ensues between him and the zombies. This is heroic because although he's still facing off against the good guys, they're not really the good guys. They just sort of look like them. Unfortunately, this doesn't last long before Magneto's hubris once again gets the best of him, and while he's bragging, he gets snuck up on and torn to pieces by Zombie Hulk and Zombie Thor. But once again, it was good while it lasted. Number 2 goes to Magneto from the Age of Apocalypse universe, where he dedicates his efforts to going back in time and preventing his friend Charles Xavier's death. In a world where the extremely powerful supervillain Apocalypse reigns over America, Magneto sends Nightcrawler, Colossus, Kitty Pryde, and Gambit to find ways to protect humans from a genetic war that he knew was looming. That's right, he was protecting humans in this reality, seemingly going against his usual resentful philosophies that couldn't allow for coexistence. Once his mission succeeds and the original Marvel universe is restored, Magneto turns to Apocalypse and tears him apart. This arc ends with Magneto reunited with his wife and son, standing along a Charles Xavier who is once again alive and well. And with Apocalypse gone for good, all was right in the world, at least for that time. And it was all thanks to the leadership and heroic actions of this alternate version of Magneto. At number 1, we have Magneto from Magneto Testament. This is not a light read. This isn't a story of Magneto coming to the aid of the Fantastic Four or the Avengers. In this story, we learn about Magneto's origin, which we all know began during World War II. He was a young Jewish boy named Max Eisenhart, trying to survive in a world where dangers exceeded even the worst supervillains in any comic book. He does everything he can to survive, all the while trying to protect Magda, the girl he loves. He makes deals with the guards to keep her safe, all the while supporting an uprising that eventually frees he and Magda from their captivity. This version of Magneto belongs at number 1 because our sympathies for this younger version of the supervillain extend beyond the world of comic books and into real life. This young Magneto heroically traverses the horrors of those times, capping off one of the most captivating and impactful origin stories out of any comic book series to date. So, do you guys agree with this list? Do you disagree? Have I thrown you into a rage by missing glaringly obvious key details? Lay it all down there in the comments. Thank you for following along with Top 10 Nerd. As always, I'm your host Ben Ball. Follow me on Instagram if you'd like, and until next time, stay nerdy.